Hi, everybody. Today is Wednesday, January 8th, and our friend Pepe Escobar is back with us. Welcome back, Pepe.
Nima, enormous pleasure to be with you. And to you and to our fabulous audience, I hope you have an Asian way of putting it, an auspicious 2025, but it's going to be hell everywhere. You all know that. But I wish at least for all of you individually, that you manage to sail through the storm. It's going to be very difficult for everyone.
Yeah. We know that the fight between the United States and China would be the next level of the conflicts
Hmm.
between the United States and other countries. But before going to that, Pepe,
Yes.
we know that there are two conflicts right now in Ukraine and in the Middle East. As we talked before, the conflict in the Middle East is much more serious, it seems to me, because these Zionist pro-Israelis in the Trump administration are totally supporting Netanyahu and his administration. But
Correct.
yesterday, we've seen that Donald Trump shared a video in which Jeffrey Sachs is talking about the conflict in the Middle East. Here is what he shared on his social media.
Hmm.
Syria. And you may actually hear from grown-up reporters who are lying through their teeth or ignorant beyond imagining that, oh, the war in Syria, yes, Russia intervened in Syria. Well, do you know that that Obama tasked the CIA to overthrow the Syrian government starting 4 years before Russia intervened? What kind of nonsense is that? And how many times did the New York Times report on Operation Timber Sycamore, which was the presidential order to the CIA to overthrow Bashar al-Assad? 3 times in 10 years. This is not democracy. This is a game. And it's a game of narrative. Why did the U.S. invade Iraq in 2003? Well, first of all, it was completely phony pretenses. It wasn't, oh, we were so wrong, they didn't have weapons of mass destruction. They actually did focus groups in the fall of 2002 to find out what would sell that war to the American people. Abe Schultzky, if you want to know the name of the PR genius. They did focus groups on the war. They wanted the war all the time. They had to figure out how to sell the war to the American people, how to scare the shit out of the American people. It was a phony war. Where did that war come from? You know what? It's quite surprising. That war came from Netanyahu, actually. You know that? It's weird. And the way it is that Netanyahu had from 1995 onward the theory that the only way we're going to get rid of Hamas and Hezbollah is by toppling the governments that support them. That's Iraq, Syria, and Iran. And the guy's nothing if not obsessive. And he's still trying to get us to fight Iran this day, this week. He's a deep, dark son of a bitch, sorry to tell you, because he's gotten us into endless wars, and because of the power of all of this in the U.S. politics, he's gotten his way. But that war was totally phony. So what is this democracy versus dictatorship? Come on, these are not even sensible terms.
Here is Donald Trump, the new president of the United States, sharing this on his social media. What does it mean, Pepe?
Well, can you imagine a president of the United States that is debunking US foreign policy for the first quarter of this century? That's the inner meaning of that. He doesn't even need to comment. He just presents what Jeffrey is saying, and everything is correct. For instance, you never hear anybody in Washington, New York, talk about Operation Timber Sycamore. It's taboo. You never hear conflicting narratives. And Jeffrey pointed to, this is a war of narrative. Of course it is. The narrative has been bent cosmically, we can say, from 9/11 onwards, nonstop, by Republicans or Democrats. This is bipartisan. This is the American ruling elites. They build the narratives. And of course, they are paid shills in Congress, in Capitol Hill, in Washington, and in mainstream media, and what our friend Ray McGovern called the Misimat, the larger industrial complex, which includes media, think tanks, etc. This is what they do. The only thing that the empire knows what to do apart from regime change, interventions, dreams of annexations, color revolutions, etc., is to imprint a global narrative because they control the global system of communications, essentially, including social media. So Jeffrey is absolutely spot on. And the details that it's a 3 minute or so, right? The details are excellent because it's a microcosm of what has been done in terms of US foreign policy following what Netanyahu and those cycles in Tel Aviv wanted since before 9/11, since the late millennium, 1998, 1999. That's it. In a nutshell, that's it. And the problem is Trump may be aware of that, not the details, of course, but of course he's going to go clashing once again straight on against these very powerful silos in the deep state. And this is the key question for Trump 2.0 on a domestic level. How is he going to deal with the deep state? Is he going to have considering everyone that he's nominated so far, it's not going anywhere. And considering the fact that 80 to 90% are hardcore Zionists, is going to get much worse, in fact. So this expectation that some may have across the global South, I'm not going to get into details because I know our audience knows very well who I'm talking about. That Trump may be a sort of progressive force running towards some sort of peace, a settlement, either in Ukraine or in the Middle East, West Asia. It's completely false. No. Essentially, what he's going to do is to follow the Zionist orders on West Asia as a whole. And in terms of Ukraine, he's going to try to go for some sort of deal that he knows that the Russians from the beginning are going to say no. And then from then onwards, it will be the usual mix of threats, intimidation, rearmament of Ukraine, etc. So the prospects are, I would say, terrifying in many aspects.
Do you think that Donald Trump would do, in my opinion, he's going to do whatever he has at his disposal, short of military confrontation with Iran? Because that would be devastating for the United States right now with the conflict in Ukraine, starting a new war in the Middle East. Because he's talking about Greenland, he's talking about Panama, he's talking about Canada, Mexico,
everything.
It's a big game in his mind. It's a game, it's a fight between the United States and China. It's not in the Middle East, it's not in Ukraine. Here comes the question, how powerful are these people in his administration, in his team, to drag him into a conflict, in a war, a direct war with Iran in the Middle East?
Exactly, Nima. This is what we're going to see perhaps the first few weeks. Maybe by the end of February, we're going to have already a pretty good idea where this is all going. Not only these, of course, this completely unmeasured proclamations of annexing everything in sight, which is what has been happening these past few days, right? But facts, of course, and how the trade war, which is going to be a simultaneous trade war against Europe and China, the first steps. So everyone is very curious about that on a geoeconomic level and on a geopolitical level, if there's going to be any sort of movement, not only vocal against Iran, especially because 3 days before Trump gets to power, as we all know, on January 17th in Moscow, Putin and Pezeshkian are going to sit down together and sign the comprehensive agreement between Russia and Iran. This is enormous, enormous, and something that I have been saying many podcasts for quite a while now. This collaboration on a military level, okay, this is economics, energy, investments, of course. But on the military level, it's what I heard from top Iranian officials in Moscow nearly 2 years ago. This was probably in March 2023. They said, look, the Russians said, what do you need? They said, whatever you need, it's yours, and vice versa. So they are really talking military terms at the highest level, and for nearly 2 years now. And this is going to be solidified by this comprehensive partnership, which is even more sophisticated than the Iran-China partnership. The Iran-China partnership, which they signed in 2021, so it's nearly 4 years now. It's basically energy and economic cooperation. The Russia-Iran partnership, it's much, much bigger, and the scope is much bigger and includes very, very close military cooperation. So we don't know, none of us, not to mention the Americans, how the Americans are going to react to that, or if they of the Trump 2.0 will understand the meaning of this deal. So, another thing that, the first few weeks will reveal to all of us. And the unstated part, Nima, of Trump 2.0 geopolitical and geoeconomic, it's the war against Brics. And obviously, they cannot even state it openly because they don't even understand what Brics is all about, especially the Trump people. Well, the Obama people didn't have a clue. Trump people flying times 2, they don't have a clue. And early this week, we had already an enormous bombshell, geopolitical, geoeconomic. Indonesia was accepted as a full BRICS member, not as a partner. You all remember that in Kazan, they announced 13 new possible BRICS partners. Indonesia was one of them. Well, 9 of them, until early this week, they responded positively, and they became officially BRICS partners. There are 4 that haven't responded yet, including Turkey. But then early this week, the Brazilian presidency of BRICS, they announced out of the blue, nobody was expecting this, that Indonesia now is a full partner. So now it's BRICS with Iran and Indonesia, right? India, Iran, and Indonesia. But this is beyond enormous because it's the consolidation of BRICS in Southeast Asia. Indonesia is the economic powerhouse of Southeast Asia. For the moment, by PPP is, if I'm not mistaken, the 7th largest economy in the world. It's going to be one of the biggest economies of this century. I had the pleasure and the privilege to work a lot of Indonesia, especially in the 90s, when they were after the Suharto era. You could see the immense possibility. It's an enormously wealthy country with a relatively well-educated population, with huge challenges that they start to address. For instance, they are delocalizing the capital from Jakarta, which is clogged all the time, to the huge island of Sulawesi. So they're going to develop one of the largest islands of the archipelago, one of the largest islands in the world, for that matter, by this delocalization. So, the prospects for Indonesia are outstanding and widely respected inside ASEAN, of course. And obviously, we already have Malaysia and Thailand as partners. So Southeast Asia is one of the focuses of development for the future. Like Putin said at the end of the year, like he started to say at the Valdai meeting, that the 2 largest poles of development in the near future are Africa and Southeast Asia. And obviously, the BRICS are looking at Africa and Southeast Asia clearly. None of that, Nima, and our audience, is examined in detail by the think tanks in the US. What they do is the exact opposite. They identify these these countries, these new powerhouses that are part of BRICS, as targets, choice targets. And we can say, even before Trump 2.0 starts, that the choice targets of this administration are going to be BRICS powerhouses. And this is building on what, this is something that, before talking to you, I was writing my first column of the year, which is going to be long, because I had to outline all these details and contradictions, of course. One of them is that a year and a half ago, American think tanks started talking about swing states. Not the American version, as you all know, but geopolitically. And they identified 6 swing states, all BRICS or BRICS partners. At the time, there were 3 official BRICS, Brazil, India, and South Africa, and 3 possible BRICS. Then they became partners, and in the case of Indonesia, now a full member. Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, and Turkey. So what was the message that the American think tank land was propagating? We're going after all these, and we're going to destabilize all these. Simple as that. Because they are a threat to the rules-based international order. And this is bipartisan, Nima, and all of you. It will come from these exiting absolutely ghastly administration, probably the worst administration in modern American history, to Trump 2.0. This is not going to change. And in many aspects, in the case of Iran, for instance, it's going to get much, much more hardcore. And in the case of Brazil, for instance, the Americans will keep inserting Brazil everywhere, using fifth columnists, the comprador elites in Brazil, etc., the Brazilian oligarchy, old school and new school, everything. And India as well. India is under their watch. South Africa, same thing. I was there 2 months ago, same thing. So this is the unstated war. So it's much, much bigger than only US against China. And obviously, you won't read that on American mainstream media.
And you talk about Brazil, but it seems to me that Donald Trump is trying to make some sort of, to consolidate the US hegemony in the North and the South America.
Yes.
What's going on? What do we expect from Donald Trump here in South America, in your opinion?
Well, Monroe Doctrine 2.0 on steroids, lots of steroids. There will be some key targets, starting with Venezuela and Nicaragua, of course. And they already have Argentina in the bag, which is an enormous tactical victory. So Argentina will keep destabilizing South American Union, among other things. So this is already on the American camp. In Brazil, as you know very well, Nima, is the most complex node of this whole charade. The Brazilian presidency of BRICS is going to be key. They started very well. The fact that, of course, this is a consensual decision. So all the BRICS decided that Indonesia now is one of us as a full member. But the fact that the Brazilians, of course, the Brazilian presidency, they had to announce it. That's an excellent start. And an excellent start for BRICS as a whole. Even considering that essentially the Brazilian presidency is going to last half the year, because they're going to have a stupid decision of having the BRICS summit in the middle of the year because of that COP stupidity at the end of the year in the Amazon, right? So let's see what they'll be able to do in 6 months. If they pick up the ball, considering what the Russians managed to do last year, which was immensely impressive. I follow it for half a year while I was in Russia last year. I spent almost half the year in Russia, and I was following very closely the BRICS discussion groups, the BRICS Business Council, the Sherpas, etc. And they managed to advance BRICS by leaps and bounds in 1 year. The Brazilians won't do that. especially because of this extremely complicated vector of the anti-Brics lobby that is very, very active even inside the Brazilian foreign ministry. We don't know the repercussions of that and how much these people are going to sabotage Brics going further in leaps and bounds. But the point is, and Brazilians forgive me if I say it bluntly, Brazil is not the leader of Brics. The leaders of Brics are Russia and China. So the basic policies and the basic drive and the overall conceptualization of where Brics are going is Beijing and Moscow. Everybody knows that. And now, of course, the fact that China, in this very turbulent 2025, they will be focusing on three levels, more or less. And one of them is directly linked to Brics. First one is the tech war between China and the US, which it's not in terms of who's winning, but China is fulfilling the objectives that they wanted 10 years ago. They are fulfilling most of them in 2025, which is to become a leader in ultra specialized high-tech domains. They identified 10 of them. They are already leader in 4 or 5. Soon they will be leader in 7 or so. And by 2030, they will probably be leader in all of those 10. So we can say that they are fulfilling their objectives. And the US is falling behind in all these, everything, quantum physics, artificial intelligence, of course, is very close. But, like electric vehicles, for instance, China is already, out there, solar panels, you name it. So they are fulfilling their objectives. So this is one vector. The other vector is very, very important. And it's the crucial Brics-related vector. Expansion of Chinese trade and markets all across the global south, the global majority. And that includes Brics, ASEAN, and APEC. APEC basically coordinates trade and investment across Asia Pacific. China is not all of them. I would say at least 90% of all APEC nations, China is the #1 trade partner of all these. ASEAN, no question. ASEAN, China is the major trade partner of all of those in ASEAN, all the ASEAN 10. And Brics, of course, is linked to BRI as well. And APEC is also linked to BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, New Silk Roads. So you see that what the Chinese were planning in 2013 when they came up with the concept of Belt and Road Initiative. At the time was one belt, one road, and nobody understood what that meant. They had to change it, right? So this was less than 12 years ago. It's amazing what they managed to do in less than 12 years because they have a Belt and Road project all across the global south, including South America, the port in Chancay in Peru that was inaugurated before the G20 by Xi in person. And of course, Asia, and this is a BRI connection with APEC, with Asia Pacific. And Asia Pacific, including the South American Pacific. So, nobody could expect that this will go so fast in a matter of only 1 decade. And that's where we are. And don't forget, when you read the official conceptualization of Belt and Road, it goes all the way to 2049. So we are just in the beginning, There's still a long way to go, So this won't deviate. The Chinese won't deviate of what they planned. In everything, in the tech war, achieving a technical supremacy in high-tech sectors, and of course, expanding their trade and investment connections all across the global south, global majority, and that includes all these organizations, Brics, APEC, ASEAN, etc. So these are the two main vectors for the Chinese. And even if Trump launches a trade war like he did in 2018, essentially. He came to power beginning of 2017, and he launched the trade war 1 year later. Blowback. It didn't work. It did not. China was not undermined because of this trade war. And there was severe blowback against American interests. So the Chinese are not worried. What I have been reading in very, very serious Chinese outlets, Guanxia or independent, relatively independent analysts in China, no, they are not. They are not worried. They are concentrated and they are focused on Belt and Road, APEC, ASEAN, and BRICS. It's even stronger than it was 1 or 2 years ago.
When we look at China, it's a big factory, it's a big production machine.
Yes.
And they want to produce. They do need energy. They do need gas and oil. They can get it from Russia and Iran.
Mm-hmm.
And they do need a market to sell the things that they produce.
Exactly.
I don't know if you watched Anthony Blinken's interview with New York Times, in which he said,
"Oh my God, I saw some excerpts." Yeah.
He said how successfully they could disconnect the European countries from China in terms of economic relationship.
This is what they want, Nima. Yeah.
And here comes the question in the mind of China: who's going to be the next market for us? Who's going to buy the things that we produce in China? They need Indonesia, they need Malaysia, they need Asia to buy the things. They need Southwest Asia, Russia, Eurasia, all of them together. It seems to me that the United States, the way that Donald Trump is trying to make things up in the United States, it's all about China, and China knows what they're doing. I don't know if the United States gets to the point that they want to get under Donald Trump.
No, they don't have a strategy, Nima. They don't think strategically. The Democrats never thought strategically, and Trump doesn't think strategically long term. It's different. It's a sort of World Wrestling Federation kind of ruling. It's very spectacular, but it's all fake at the same time. There's no substance to it. We were discussing until 1 or 2 minutes ago, the Chinese know exactly where they're going, and they know exactly where they're going since the beginning of the Belt and Road nearly 12 years ago. Xi came to power in 2012, and he announced the Belt and Road in Jakarta and first in Astana in Kazakhstan, and then in Jakarta 2013. This is their overarching geopolitical and geoeconomic blueprint for the next few decades, in fact. So, as you know, the Chinese have 5-year plans, which in fact are 15-year plans. They think at least 15 years in advance, In the case of Belt and Road, they're already thinking 30 years in advance. So they know that. So whatever happens in Washington and changes of administration, for them, and it's the Chinese way, of course. It is Sun Tzu all the time. It's deception, very sophisticated way of no frontal aggression, capitalizing on the enemy's mistakes, which is something that not only China, but the BRICS, starting in 2025, now are going to do. They will capitalize on the deep state's mistakes as an organization. That's why you need a very high level of understanding among, well, I would say at least among the foreign ministers, but especially between the leaders of the BRICS nations. They need to be talking all the time among themselves in terms of how BRICS will capitalize on. There will be lots of mistakes by the deep state and by Trump 2.0 in terms of everything that has been announced, sort of, spectacular style, circus style. We're going to tax everybody that will try to bypass the US dollar, all that crap. There are endless ways of circumventing and bypassing these so-called policies, So, and this is what Russia and China, as leader of BRICS, are trying to impress on everybody else. We need to be talking all the time because this is a work in progress. During Kazan, there was we emerged with the concept of the Brics lab. Brics is a gigantic lab, in fact. They are starting to test models of convergence, of sustainable development, of paying for settlement trade in different currencies, in their mutual currencies, etc. This is a work in progress, and it's already ongoing, and will keep spreading. So when we talk about de-dollarization, once again, it's not that BRICS will come up with the BRICS currency this year. No, that's not the point. The point is diversifying their trade using mostly their national currencies. And this is already ongoing and will keep expanding whatever the Americans do and whoever is in power in Washington. This is the most important point. And of course, the fact that China, the way they think long term includes learning from their mistakes all the time. This is classic Deng Xiaoping, crossing the river while feeling the stones implies that you can slip in one of the stones, you fall, then you rise again and you keep crossing. And this is what they do. They learn a lot on how to implement new Belt and Road projects. They're learning a lot on their dialogue with all their ASEAN partners. They're learning a lot from the Africans. When the Africans go to China, they tell the Chinese, look, this project here, that's not working because of the Chinese tweak it. This is very, very important. This implies what? Diplomacy, listening to the other, paying attention to the other. Everybody's sitting at the same table and everybody has a right to express themselves and present problems at the table. And the Chinese, which used to be, let's say, the Chinese pyramid way of looking at the rest of the world is changing little by little, and they are learning, which is a very complicated process for a civilization that is a nation state that is so powerful, ancient, and of course ruled the world for a great deal of recorded history. And that's fascinating to see this process going on, which in parallel we have the Russian process, which is this Russian idea of integrating Eurasia, which their official concept is called Greater Eurasia Partnership. It's the Russian interpretation of the Belt and Road, essentially. Of course, Russia doesn't have the financial firepower of China, but Russia has a lot of soft power across Eurasia. And now, extra soft power in Southeast Asia, in Africa, in parts of Latin America. That helps this Russian vision, which is not only Eurasia. We can even talk of Afro-Eurasia. And in terms of China as well, this process of integration is Afro-Eurasian, essentially, and including parts of Latin America. So what do the Americans have to offer to counterpoint all that? Literally nothing. And gets worse. They are supporting at the same time a genocide, an endless genocide, recognized as such by practically the whole global majority. And now they are supporting terrorists in power in a former sovereign Arab nation. The global majority looks at that and said, all that bullshit that you talked about Al-Qaeda for 25 years and all that, that's what it was, bullshit. Now these people are in power in a former sovereign nation, and you love it. So this is what the empire of chaos, as I called it over 10 years ago, is offering the global majority. Support for terrorism and support for genocide. It's very easy, Nima, if you are, for instance, the leader of Indonesia, to look around and say, okay, who I'm going to align with? It's a done deal, right? And for many African nations who want to be part of BRICS, South American nations want to be part of BRICS. The rest of Southeast Asia, apart from Singapore, Singapore is a very peculiar case because Singapore is a financial warehouse. It's a sort of American aircraft carrier in Southeast Asia, and they try to a measure of equilibrium between the US and China and the West and China. Because they're very small, they can do that. And because they're very small and because they are basically an enormous warehouse and a crossroads of trade. But the rest of Southeast Asia, they are frankly, apart from the Philippines, which is a colony, of course, they are frankly aligned with China and with their major trade partner. And whatever the US does in terms of this destabilization is not going to change that.
I think what has happened in Syria is so alarming for China in terms of Uyghurs, for Russia, Dagestan, and Chechnya. These are two. The United States has been supporting all those years against Russia and supporting these Chechnya, these forces in Chechnya. And for Iran as well, because we know how important the fight between Iran and Daesh or ISIS was. And General Soleimani was behind that. He was fighting ISIS in the region. These three countries totally understand what has happened in Syria. But at the same time, when we look at Syria, it's much more complicated, Pepe, because yesterday, the Jerusalem Post, according to a government committee in Israel, reported that Israel must prepare for a potential war with Turkey. This is huge.
Yes, we were expecting, it's coming even earlier than we all expected, because it's a direct clash between Eretz Israel, the ever-expanding Israel with no borders, trying to gobble up a great chunk of West Asia, and Erdogan and his clique's vision of neo-Ottomanism, which includes engulfing most of Syria and getting rid of those Kurds. For instance, yesterday, the foreign ministry in Ankara, they are already floating in fact, they're already spinning that there may be a military operation against the Kurds. Can you imagine that, Nima? It will be NATO against NATO on Syrian territory. No, it's as surrealist as it can get. It will be NATO against NATO on Syrian territory, which in theory is controlled by a bunch of former head choppers. So we were all expecting from the beginning that the clash will be inevitable between Israel, the US, and Turkey, which are now the so-called controllers of Syria. And the fact that this Hugo Boss-clad former head chopper in Damascus, nobody trusts him. Nobody. The Americans don't trust him. Israel, obviously not. And even the Turks. So he's being used. Jolani is being used as a patsy for the moment. Sooner or later, they will discard him. And they're going to bring what they're going to bring to after. Nobody knows. But the fact is, it's not going to last long. And what he has been saying that we're going to have elections maybe in 4 years. Forget it. He needs elections in 2025, a new president, a new prime minister, a new parliament. Otherwise, sanctions on Syria will continue, and Syria will continue to be a mess. And the people who are under him formally, all those Salafi jihadi gangs, I think there are more than 50, if I'm not mistaken, all sorts of groups and subgroups, they are already pissed because he has not proclaimed an Islamic emirate. So they're going to turn it against him again. So it will be literally the end of a Sergio Leone spaghetti western, everybody shooting against everybody else, literally. And it's going to start sooner rather than later. There's no question about that. So the Turkish project of annexing Syria is not going as swimmingly as they probably imagine, right? And of course, This suits the Americans and Israelis. What do the Americans and Israeli want? A completely emasculated, neutralized, devastated, ungovernable Syria, like Libya 2.0, that will never pose a threat to Israel in military terms. The cutting off of the supply line to Hezbollah will continue, and Syria will be non-existent as a sovereign Arab power. This is what the Zionists in the US want and what the Zionists in Tel Aviv want. Turkey is different. Turkey would like to annex the parts of Syria that work, the industrial belt of Syria in the western part of Syria. This is going to be very hard because to do that, they'll have to go frontally against Israel and the US. Can they do it? Nobody knows. I'll try to get some answers. I'll be in Istanbul in 2 weeks or so. So I'll try to get some answers over there. That will be quite enlightening, in fact. And getting the feel of Turkish public opinion about all that, because for the moment, it's very, very fuzzy. We don't know what the majority of public opinion that really thinks about this adventure. If you read the Erdogan press, obviously, you won't get anything. And in Turkey, if you go against the Erdogan neo-Ottoman setup, you can be in deep, deep trouble. So it will be interesting to try to get this. And even in Istanbul, you can get it, Nima. It's fascinating. You cross from the European side, you cross the Bosphorus to the Asian side, and you actually meet people from Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, Uyghurs, going back and forth. They're all there as well. They come to Istanbul for recreation, to, get more cash, you name it, So it's, as a crossroads, is perfect. And the Uyghur issue that you mentioned, the Chinese intelligence is like this. I'm sure by now they have facial recognition of every single Uyghur in Syria, because they know. And these people are crazy enough to actually announce, they made a video saying that their next target is to come back to Xinjiang and start jihad against China in Xinjiang. So obviously Chinese intel, they are all over the place with that, just like Russia intel is all over the place with the Chechens, the Uzbeks, exactly, because this will mean a new chapter of jihad from the Caucasus to Central Asia. So from the point of view of the two major Brics, Syria is an enormous headache. There's no question about that. But this is, but this whole mess is only starting. We haven't even seen the real start of the major shootout, involving everybody, every faction, from Salafi jihadists to sub-Armani leaders, to extra Zionists, to the Zionists working for Trump, you name it. Everybody will be involved. The only ones who will be totally out of the picture will be the Europeans, which was fascinating. The famous Annalena 360 degrees to Syria, which was the greatest joke of the beginning of 2025. The Europeans were the last ones in the conga line all the way. Everybody went there first. The Americans, the Turks, Kiev, then finally they sent those two stupid foreign minister of Germany, foreign minister of France, who were treated like the chihuahuas that they really are, in fact.
What was the main objective of Annalena Baerbock, the foreign minister of Germany, to Syria? Was that related to Russia's presence in Syria and the way that they're asking Russia to stay?
You nailed it, Dima. Okay, the short answer to your question, that's it. And in fact, this was a Germany-France visit. So theoretically, they were representing the EU. So this is the EU position. you have to throw out the Russians out of Tartus and Hymim. And basically, the Hugo boss, Salafi Jihad, he didn't say anything. He evaded the issue completely, especially because they are talking to the Russians all the time. The Russians are very active diplomatically. We are not sure yet what kind of carrots they are offering to the so-called Jolani. Did you see, by the way, Nima, that the whole Jolani provisional government, everybody is from Idlib? It's a bunch of former head choppers in Idlib now reconverted into a government. It's totally nuts, you know. So the Russians have dealt with a bunch of nutcases. So they have enormous experience in the matter. They're talking to these people. They say, okay, what do you want? We don't want to leave. So if we don't leave, what do you want? Okay, so this is I'm gonna know a little bit more in Moscow by the end of this. What are they exactly talking? Because you don't read about this in Russian media as well. This is for the moment, this is a sort of ironclad secret. But there may be some sort of deal. Can you imagine if there is a deal where, okay, Tartus and Hymim stay? The Americans and the Europeans are NATO stunt. They're going to go crazy about that. So they will instantly find a way to depose Jolani and his Idlib government. And if that's another if, okay, you have to leave. The Russians already have their plan B, which is Libya. And they could have a plan C, part of the Russia-Iran comprehensive deal. The Russians can always pick up the phone, call to Iran and say, look, what about, can we use one of your bases in the Persian Gulf for us? The Iranians can say, yes, of course you can. It's part of our deal. So people in Moscow are not worried about that. But of course, from a geostrategic point of view, for Russia to keep, their mini empire of bases in the Eastern Mediterranean, that will be tremendous, even with a new government. But it's a very sensitive subject in Russia at the moment, Nima, because a lot of people, maybe not necessarily among the higher echelons of power in Moscow, they could interpret it as Russia basically talking to terrorists and adapting to terrorism. It's not going to go down well. But then we have geostrategics above all, Nima, I have a question for you. And this is very, very important. And you're probably one of the best people anywhere who could answer concisely about it. How do you see this obvious clash in Tehran between, let's put it this way, summing it all up, Khamenei and IRGC on one side, supporting the axis of resistance, especially now in these very challenging times, and what we could describe as a crypto-Atlanticist pro-Western faction in favor of a sort of rapprochement with the West. And when they say West, they mean essentially Europe, not the US, because they know it's going to be very hard with the Zionists behind Trump. And that would include the president, Arakshi, and Zarif as vice president. How do you see this clash developing, especially now, as Trump comes to power?
100% Khamenei and IRGC would win, and they have the upper hand, and they can just remove these people from power. Let's put it that way.
How would they remove these people from power?
They can make them useless. Even they are in power, but they don't have any sort of power. Let's put it that way. Because if let's say it this way, the foreign minister of Iran, the minister of intelligence in Iran, the the vice president of Iran, all of them should be selected through the negotiation with the supreme leader of Iran.
Right.
He can remove these people from power easily. That's why I do believe that many people in the West are talking about that this new president is a reformist. He wants to make some sort of changes in the way that the United States and Iran have been fighting for such a long time. But we know at the end of the day, the United States is not interested in doing this. Biden administration, if you remember, the Biden administration came to power talking about JCPOA, hammering Donald Trump during those days.
Mm-hmm.
And they came into power. They didn't do anything about Iran and the deal between the United States and Iran. But at the end of the day, the leadership in Iran has decided to give a chance to these people in Iran to make some sort of deal with the United States. But I can say with 100% that the leadership and IRGC and these people are totally in power in Iran. And these people who are working, they're trying to manage the situation the way that they're thinking that they can manage the relationship between Iran and the United States. But they don't have any sort of leverage on the leadership on IRGC. I can assure you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes, it is correct. But the point is, Nima, I'm thinking of North Tehran and the comprador elites inside Iran. These are very dangerous because these have very good Western connections. And they can undermine Iran from the inside to a certain extent, of course. I wouldn't say in terms of undermining the RGC or even undermining Khamenei, no. But they can make things very, very difficult in terms, for instance, of support for the axis of resistance. They can interfere to this point, right?
Let's say it this way, that the leadership in Iran, considering all of these people together, I would say 90% in favor of resistance and 10%. Even if you peel off Zarif, he's he's not the way that he's talking about. He feels about the resistance, but he thinks that the tactics that can be used by the Iranians can be different. But after all, if we put Zarif in the opposite side of resistance, if we say that he's not in favor of resistance, they're not more than 10% of power in Iran. They're not more than 10%.
Right. And of course, now with Trump 2.0 and all those demented Zionists behind him, in fact, public opinion in Iran will side even more with Khamenei and the RGC. This is the correct tactic. And we have to support the axis of resistance, help them to rejuvenate. For instance, we are getting some very interesting reports from Lebanon that Hezbollah is consolidating their reorganization very, very fast. Wow. All of us who've been there, we never doubted. They have the cadres, people were extremely well educated, intelligence, they have geopolitical view, not only they understand military matters, but the geopolitics, they are very, very well informed. So obviously, rejuvenating an organization like that on a civilian and military level, they can do it very, very fast. So there's some noise in West Asia that there will be a reconfiguration of the axis of resistance in a very short time, especially Hezbollah, IRGC, Al-Quds Force, Ansarullah, and the Iraqis. And they will reconnect the war, in fact, against Eretz Israel. It's quite possible. And once again, sooner than all of us expected, right?
And you know the president of Iran, Pezeshkian, he he was putting himself as a candidate for the parliament in Iran before before
before
being part of this presidential election. He wasn't. He has not been confirmed by the council in Iran to be acceptable to be part of the
so,
parliament. Yeah, yeah.
parliament. Wow.
And after that, you see they're accepting him. They confirmed that he can be part of the presidential election in Iran. It was a decision on the part of the Iranian leadership. It wasn't about Pezeshkian, you know.
It's true. So what you're saying basically is that Khamenei gave the imprimatur, okay, this guy can run for the presidency.
Exactly. Exactly. This is
Yeah.
what has happened. And that's why I do believe that these people cannot change the Iranian policy.
Yeah.
Iran has a hardcore policy considering supporting resistance. I do not believe that would change.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Nima. That was really good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead. Question.
Just to wrap up this session, Pepe, we have two countries, Iran and Russia, right now. Both of them, as you've mentioned, with this new president in Iran, Pezeshkian, he's a reformist. He wants some sort of negotiation with the West. And Russia wants some sort of negotiations on Ukraine. They want to put an end to the conflict in Ukraine, despite having this Kursk incursion, the second incursion in the Kursk region. How do you see Donald Trump in the years to come? Is it going to be the same way that we've been witnessing Trump and we've been witnessing Biden and his administration talking and not doing anything in that direction? We didn't have the war in Ukraine. He was talking about JCPOA. He didn't do anything. He supported Israel in its genocide in Gaza. What would be the Trump's policy if we assume that his main goal is China? Are we going to get some sort of deal between Iran and the United States, Russia and the United States?
There's no realist perspective of a deal, either with Iran or with Russia. The Russians have already made it very clear that the war in Ukraine will end under our terms. And the terms are very clear for quite a while now, spelled out by Putin himself, re-spelled by Putin. Lavrov talks about it every week, literally. Zakharova, same thing. And obviously, the American ruling classes will never accept it. Never, never. When I was talking to Judge Knapp early this week before talking to you, and it's important to once again talk about it with you and our audience. The extraordinary interview that Emmanuel Todd, who wrote the best Western book about the defeat of the West against Russia in the proxy war in Ukraine. This is the book, which for the moment is only La défaite de l'Occident, the defeat of the West. For the moment only in French, not yet in English, but it's already being discussed and independently in English for quite a while. So Todd gave an interview earlier this week, which is the key headline is absolutely stunning. He said that Trump's job will be to manage the defeat of the US against Russia. That's it. That encapsulates it all. How can Trump possibly sell to the American elites an American defeat against Russia? We all know this is absolutely impossible. And I'm talking about the real ruling elites of the US, the follow the money elite, the old East Coast aristocratic American style families. Never, they will never accept it. So how he is going to manage that? And that's how Todd puts it so brilliantly. There's no judgment. It's just stating a fact. He will have to manage that. And this is unmanageable by definition. Because if the US and the ruling elites accept the defeat of the US and NATO against Russia in Novorossiya, that's the end of the rules-based international order, and that's the end of the American primacy, period. You don't need anything else. Whatever happens in West Asia, it's not going to change the fact. Because West Asia is not a total NATO war against somebody. It's a genocide. It's a localized genocide. Ukraine is a total Western war against Russia. Can you imagine you recognizing that Russia wins? So that's, we're not going to have an offering coming from Trump to actually solve the war. We're going to have instances of, seductions in terms of a possible ceasefire, line of contact, whatever. And the Russians are going to look at that and say, look, this is Minsk 3 or Minsk 4. You know what happened to the previous Minsk. We don't trust you. And even if we sign with you, you know you won't respect it. So no possibility of a deal at all. And in terms of Gaza and West Asia, it's even worse, Nima. It's even worse because we know the mindset of these people in Tel Aviv. We know that this apocalyptic messianic mindset is not going to change. And we know that they can do anything they want with anybody who's in power in the US, especially now with Trump surrounded by Ziocons and Zionists. So that's why the perspectives ahead are gloomy, to say the least.
Thank you so much. Muito obrigado, Pepe.
Obrigado a você.
Prazer, como sempre. Desejo tudo de melhor para você. Vai melhorar.
A nossa vida é ficar falando de horror.
Exatamente. Mas foi um grande prazer.
Enorme prazer. And thanks everybody, our audience. Obrigado a vocês todos. And let's keep engulfing in horror.
Exatamente. Yeah, that's right.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
See you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Obrigado. Bye-bye. See you.